Good afternoon and welcome to another webinar from the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans, Communications Specialist with the Center. I want to thank you for joining us again. As always, you can find a schedule of all of our upcoming webinars with recordings of past sessions on our center's website at cap.unl.edu/webinars. And today we have a timely topic as pasture and native rangeland forage production fluctuates greatly through time due to precipitation, temperature, range health, and soil nutrients. The amount and timing of spring and early summer precipitation is an important factor in determining annual plant production. And using critical trigger dates can help producers adjust stocking rates if precipitation and the resulting forage production is expected to be below average. So today's webinar will walk through trigger dates and discuss how drought can impact forage production on native rangeland. It will also discuss what management options may be possible for producers at each date. And we definitely invite your questions to be entered into the Q&A panel or the chat box here in Zoom, and we will work to get those answered before our time is up. And to present today, we are really glad to have three experts with us from Nebraska Extension's Livestock Systems team. Livestock Systems educator Ryan Benjamin from Cherry County. Randy Sainer is the Livestock Systems program leader. He's in Lincoln County. And to start us off here, we have T.L. Meyer, Livestock Systems educator from Thomas County. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us and to our panel. And T.L., I'll turn it over to you to get started.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Thank you guys for joining us today. We'll go through here real quick. The next slide, please. Just what we're hoping to cover today. Today's presentation also ties to a Beef Watch article we have over on beef.unl.edu called Drought Planning Trigger Dates. And so please feel free to access that as well for further information. We're also going to cover some of the weather forecasts, both current and past, and talk about how drought affects plants. We'll talk about how we can adjust stocking rates, how that may look, maybe some other management options, along with the actual trigger dates we're talking about in the article. And then we'll finish up with some resources. If today's discussion furthers your curiosity or concern, and next slide, please, we would encourage you to join us again on Tuesday, April 15th. We are hosting a webinar here with the Livestock Systems team in the evening. Not only will it be online, but it will also be viewed at the sites Rushville, Scottsbluff, Kimball, Thedford, and O'Neill. So if today's discussion gets you a little more concerned or you want to learn some more, please join us on next Tuesday, April 15th at 6:30 Mountain Time. Next slide. So a few disclaimers before we start today. We realize the options we're going to talk about may not work for everyone because that's going to depend on your goals and your resources, how you manage drought. And last but not least, hopefully, as we keep talking about drought, the rain will come and we won't need to have this discussion for a while. But next slide. What we're looking at is the percent of normal precipitation since last October. For those of you in western Nebraska and the Panhandle and other parts of the state as well, 2024 grazing season ended on a fairly dry note. Since October, we are below average on precipitation. Next slide, please. Which the current drought monitor reflects that as well, particularly there in the Panhandle, looking pretty dry. And the outlook going forward, next slide, please, also shows that we are likely to remain in a drought for most of Nebraska through 2025 grazing season. Next slide, please. So the reason we're doing this webinar today is we're hoping to, if it's not already on your mind, to just remind you that by planning ahead for drought, That's going to provide you with more options and probably more flexibility. We can't stress enough, be keeping a current inventory of both your animal and feed resources. And also by planning ahead during drought, this allows you to make some decisions based on facts and not emotions. Because if you don't plan, you end up reacting to the situation. So again, allows us to make some decisions ahead of time based on facts, not emotions. Next slide. Ryan?
Yeah, so we'll talk just a little bit about this map here. This is the root zone soil moisture that NASA puts out this map. It's remotely sensed data, so they use satellites to kind of figure this out. So it's maybe not the most precise, but it's some of the best widespread data that we have. You can see that there are some areas of the state that are light blue. That just means that they're kind of 70 to 80% of normal. The dark blue color would be 100% of normal, and then that dark red is like 0% of normal. So it's kind of a weird index, but basically the warmer colors are drier and the bluer colors are wetter. As you can see, a lot of the state is fairly dry. This root zone soil moisture is really important for grass growth, especially our cool season grasses here the next couple months. So if we can move to the next slide, please. We'll talk quickly about how plants actually use water. Plants have to have water to grow, obviously. But it's kind of like their feed in a way. They make their own sugars and feed of, as most of us know, but they require water to do that. And they exchange water for carbon dioxide in order to build those sugars. So as soils get drier, the soils actually hold on to water more tightly, and it becomes harder for plants to move that water up into the plant and out into the atmosphere. So once plants become drought stressed enough, they will go dormant. That doesn't mean they're dead. It just means they're not actively photosynthesizing. So they're not actually building any sugars. And then they require using some of their own root reserves to maintain that plant through the dry spell. So if we can move to the next slide. This is just a diagram that shows a little more in detail what I'm talking about. The movement of water up out of the ground through the plant into the atmosphere. Basically, plants are just a big water pump. So anyway, we can move to the next slide. So here, this shows a little bit about how drought can affect root growth and how kind of drought and grazing interact maybe. So when these plants go dormant, like I said, they have to use carbohydrate reserves in the roots to keep the plant alive, the roots and the crown of the plant. So think of basically the plant right at the soil surface is still doing cellular respiration. So doing the same kind of things that you and I do, breathing out carbon dioxide and taking in oxygen, but they're not photosynthesizing. So that shrinks the root mass of the plants, meaning that there is eventually fewer roots to actually take up water after the drought is over, or even throughout the drought. We're losing that root mass. Overgrazing does a similar thing, in that it limits the amount of photosynthetic material that the plants have, and so then they have to draw up carbohydrate reserves to be able to continue to put photosynthetic material above ground. Anyway, they interact to have a compounding effect often during drought, and those can have a long-term impact after drought if we end up severely overgrazing in combination with drought. One thing I will mention here is that cool season grasses are often less drought tolerant than warm season grasses. Cool season grasses would be your native needle grasses, wheat grasses, your little sedges. So in the panhandle, think like blackroot or something like that. Warm season grasses would be your little blue stems, your big blue stems, your Indian grass, your prairie sandreed, things like that. So another cool season grass would be smooth brome, but it tends to be a little more drought tolerant than most of our native species. Anyway, we'll move on to the next slide.
Okay, so we're going to talk about possibly having to reduce stocking rates today, and just a couple things to keep in mind as we go through that. When we talk about reducing stocking rates, there's really two ways to do that. Either reduce the length of time we graze a pasture, or we reduce the number of animal units on a pasture. Next slide, please. So when we talk about animal units, just for reference in this talk, and this is what we're using today, is one animal unit is the equivalent to 1,000-pound animal. In my area, our area, neck of the woods, I would say most of our mature cows are roughly 1,300 to 1,400 pounds. So we're probably looking at more of a 1.3 animal unit to assign to a cow. But just keep in mind, we do consider that one animal unit or 1,000-pound animal. We consider them to consume 26 pounds of air dry forage a day.
And TL, the other thing I guess I would mention is don't forget the calf, because the calf eats grass too. And we would figure him at what, about a 1.3 or a 0.3 or 4 average. So you got to average it because it's smaller weight and gets to a bigger weight at the end. So when you're figuring animal units, don't forget the calf. That's my point.
Nope.
Thanks.
Research we've done has shown we see them consuming grass pretty early on. So we recommend, and most research recommends, starting to count them at 3 months of age, based on their weight again. So if you have a 250, 300-pound calf, that's going to be a 0.25 or 0.3 animal unit. Okay, so in the next slides, Ryan is going to tell us what to look at each trigger date, and then Randy's going to discuss some management options if we're continuing to be dry. Ryan, after you.
Yeah, so our first management trigger date is actually already passed. That would be April 1st, but kind of just think early April. One of the most important things at this point of the year is our soil moisture. Think back to the NASA slide that I showed you. This accounts for, a little bit of the end of the previous growing season, and through the winter, that dormant season moisture. That's really important to start our cool season grass growth, as well as, current precipitation. A lack of moisture at this point is going to impact our cool season grass growth. They're already greening up. Most of you have probably seen that. So they're starting to green, and then they'll hit what's called a rapid growth window. I think we'll look at that just a little later maybe, but there's a time when they can really most effectively use this moisture to put on pounds of forage, and we're starting into that window right now. Once again, on the right, I'm just showing you the fact that we are short on precipitation for this water year. And just so you all know, this is put out by the High Plains Regional Climate Center, and this map may be going away shortly. Next.
So, so let's talk some management things. So if exceptionally dry, you want to reduce that stocking rate, and we're getting some areas we could probably call that, other areas maybe not. 10 to 20% cool season rangeland. So the other thing we might do is we might reduce, or we might wait to put them out on range later so that plant can develop some roots. So if it does rain, it's got some root source there. You want to inventory all your cattle and feed resources and what should go first. So maybe your late calvers, your opens, anything that lost a calf, things that aren't very productive. You want to get rid of them first. And then keep your smaller animal units, heifers versus pairs. The reason we would talk about that, those heifers are getting bred for calves next year, so you'll still get a calf out of them, but they're smaller. They're like 800 pounds. They're going to eat less forage than a cow and a calf that's, 1,000 pounds plus a 300-pound calf, or more likely a 1,300-pound cow with a 400-pound calf is going to eat a lot more. So we can keep those younger cows and those heifers and hopefully save on pasture. And then your pasture leases, evaluate drought clauses. So do you have a drought clause or do you not? And depending on who you are, if you're the landowner or the cattle producer, if you don't have one, it's a little harder to get people to go off the land. If you do have one, it gives you an idea. Plus, it gives the producer an idea, hey, I need to start looking for more pasture. And so having those clauses, I think, are really important and helpful to you, especially if you don't know the party very well. It just helps you. Thank you. If you got any other questions, holler, or you guys got anything to add to that?
Nope. Our next trigger date is kind of a range of dates. This kind of depends at where you're at in the state when this all occurs, but April 15th to May 10th, this is kind of the start of the rapid growth window that I was talking about for cool season grasses. The 30 to 45 day forecasts that are put out by the National Weather Service are starting, they're fairly accurate for this time window. So if you think of like the maps that we'll show you here in a second, they also make some for the month. In April, currently the map says that we have equal chances of being warmer than normal or cooler than normal, and equal chances of being drier or wetter than normal for the month of April. But if we move to the next slide, we'll see that the seasonal forecasts, so these are 90-day forecasts for April, May, June, and May, June, July. The April, May, June one has most of the state equal chances on being warmer or cooler than normal. This is temperature that we're currently looking at. But once we move into that May, June, July window, it's looking like we'll be trending warmer than normal for most of the state. Maybe that little northern, northeastern part, it looks like might be equal chances. This is not quite as accurate maybe as the 30-day forecasts, but it gives us at least a trend that we can start basing some management decisions off of. If we look at the next slide, that is precipitation data, and you will see that for both the April, May, June and the May, June, July timeframe, we are trending below normal precipitation for most of the state, and then for the May, June, July, all of the state. So we expect to be drier and warmer than normal, which obviously drought conditions. So I guess with that, I'll let Randy talk a little bit more about some management decisions that can be made in this time frame.
So April 15th to May 10th, decrease your stocking rate more as we get drier, right? This is as we get drier. Call those late calvers, those open ones. And I mentioned this earlier on the other one, delay turnout. Know your hay and feed inventory. And prime examples, my brother was telling me, hey, you're going to be short of hay if you don't get some more hay. So look at that, make sure that you get it, and now would be the time to get it before it gets really dry, because hay prices are probably going to go up. There is a lot of hay moving right now, so just something to think about on those two. But anything else you guys got to add?
I guess the one thing I would add is hay prices currently are at a fairly fair price, I would say. It could be a pretty good opportunity to buy up some fairly cheap feed, especially considering the current cattle price. It's fairly cheap. So. Did you have any comments, DL?
No, you guys are doing great. Thanks.
Okay. So the next time frame that we have is May 20th to June 10, so kind of late May, early June. At this point, almost all your cool season grasses have finished the rapid growth window. Mid-June, they'll be done with the rapid growth window, which means that they will not be able to take advantage of any precipitation past that point. They will have put on all the forage that they're going to grow. So for those of you that depend on that cool season grass growth, you'll have the forage that you'll have. For those of us in the sandhills and more mixed grass prairie, that we depend on warm season grass growth as well. We can still take advantage of more precipitation at this point, and we're just starting the warm season really rapid growth window. You can compare spring precipitation to the normal or average precipitation and kind of figure out where we're setting compared to normal, compared to that long-term average. Obviously there's no average here, but if we're a lot drier and if the soil moisture is a lot lower, then we might consider taking some more management decisions. Actions.
So May 20th to June 10th, management, again, reduce stocking rates 30 to 40% more. And we keep saying that, right? We keep reducing those numbers. Call late calvers, opens. You might shorten the breeding season depending on the calving season. Maybe sell your bulls because once their cows are bred, you can get rid of them. They're not necessary. You can buy new ones next year. Doesn't mean they won't be higher, but at least that's one thing off your plate. And then do you look at those replacement heifers versus pairs? Do you sell the heifers or do you sell the pairs? Well, the pairs are going to eat more grass. So you kind of got to decide where you're at, and your heifers are kind of your future. So in some cases, you might decide to keep the heifers just because you'll save on grass there, versus the pairs. They're already, they've got calves that they're going to bring pretty good at the barn, and they're going to eat a lot more. So that's just something to think about. Again, we're reducing every time we do this, right? Because there's less and less, we're seeing less and less rain, so the grass is growing less, so we have less out there to eat. And so that's why we're doing this. Plus, it'll help your pasture come back better after a drought than if you overgraze it. Now, the other option would be to put these cows in on a limited ration in the corral, or an area that you don't care to herd, a small area where you could feed them, in a bunk and do it. And we have some people that'll do that. They'll move into confinement. So, and we have lots of information on that also, but just a thought.
So the next time frame that we'll look at is June 15th to June 30th, the end of June there. Most of your cool season grass growth is is done, like I mentioned, they're about mid-June, mid to late June, unless it's irrigated. Some of us have the privilege of having some pivots that we can grow some forage on. That can be a really good kind of intermediate forage. By the end of June, we'll have about half of our warm season grass growth, just on average for all the different species. So it'll kind of give you an idea by the end of June, kind of maybe how things are looking and what to expect for the next few months of the growing season. Rainfall after late June, it will benefit some warm season species more than others. And depending on your range condition and whatnot, it'll depend on how well those warm season grasses are able to take advantage of current moisture. Also, if all that moisture comes in a single shot rapidly, that's not real useful to the plants, especially on our sandier soils. I think there's some research out there that says like every 1/10 of an inch, every day with a tenth of an inch of rain equals about 100 pounds of forage production on the sand hills. So again, that kind of spread out moisture is important.
Yeah, the other thing is we do have a question, Ryan, and I think we can address it right now. So instead of selling pairs, how early could we wean and sell the calves? You can early weaning calves 60 to 90 days, a lot of people have done. So you could take them off, and that would take them off the grass and just feed them a grain or hay, and they're going to use it more efficiently anyway. Give those cows a chance to dry up. They're going to take less feed if they're dried up and not nursing a calf. So that would be the answer to that question. Go ahead now. So June 15th to 30th management. So again, by the way, you can early wean, right? Reduce stocking rates, shorten the breeding season. Again, that depends on when you calve. We want them to be at least 60 days, but what they've weaned as early as 60 to 90 days. Sell those bulls because again, if you're eating grass, they're not producing a calf, and they've hopefully got all the cows bred. Maybe not, depending on when you're calving, right? So you're going to have to decide that on when you're done, the breeding season's done. And then preg check cows, collates and open. And you can preg check early at ultrasound at like almost 30 days. So that's the advantage of ultrasound. A lot of vets like it because it saves their arms. But you could do that and then sell those cows that aren't bred, and you would know the ones that were. Now, you could still have some embryo loss from those cows, but in general, that gives you an early time to get rid of those open cows early, and they'll be in good shape also at that time to sell.
Looking at kind of mid-June to mid-July. Once again, precipitation and your soil moisture are really important at this point for your warm season grass growth. Most of that is going to be pretty well done by the middle of July. There are a few species, some of the shorter grass species like blue grama that might benefit from some precipitation after this point, but a lot of our tall grass warm season species are pretty much done growing at this point.
So if we look at the July 15th management, again, reduce stocking rate. We've heard said that a lot, right? Remove from pasture. You could put them in a lot. I've had people that did confinement cow operations back in 22 when they ran out of grass. And so what do? We put them in a lot, and then they kept them over till winter, and it did cost them a little bit more, but the next year it rained and they didn't have to sell a lot of their cows. So that was the advantage of that. Shorten your breeding season up. And that way those cows that aren't bred, you could sell. Open cows are worth a lot of money right now. Call your late calvers, the opens, and of course the bulls. Again, you can get rid of them because once the cows are bred, they really don't need to do anything but eat grass, and we can get rid of them and buy new bulls the next year. Early wean, here we talk about early weaning and 60 to 90 days. So if you're a March 1st, so March, April, May, that's 90 days. You could have been early weaning then, depending on when you calve. If you calve in May, then May, June, July would be around 90 days. May, June would be 60. So you could wean them. You could creep feed the calves. Now that's going to help probably with forage consumption, but it's not going to help what milk they drink from the cow. What our research would say is they'll drink just as much milk if they're crepe fed or not. The one thing it does do, it does reduce the amount of forage they eat. And so that's where your advantage might come in. But again, the cows are going to get sucked down just like normal because they're going to nurse them just about as much.
Okay, so kind of a large jump from July to September, but there's really not much going on grass growth wise between mid to late July and September. There is an opportunity in September if we have good soil moisture or get some good rains that some of those cool seasons can regrow or come out of dormancy and put on some forage there in the fall. Obviously, that depends on kind of temperatures and moisture, but as we move through the year, continuing to look at those precipitation forecasts, they'll get more accurate as we get closer, and that'll kind of give us an idea of what to expect as far as forage potential. I guess one thing I did want to mention that I forgot to looking at the maps is we are looking slightly better than 2022. The forecasts look just as bleak, but our current position is slightly better. So I'm not telling you that you don't need to reduce numbers as much as you did in 22 potentially. I'm just saying currently things look a little better. This graphic on the right, guess it's just showing that there's an interaction between soils and plants, and that as you overgraze plants, you have some impact on your soil ability to absorb and hold on to moisture, and there can be both a negative kind of spiral or a positive spiral this way. If you overgraze, you continue to hurt your soils, and they continue to support less plant growth. But you can also reverse this, and proper grazing can help your soils, and that can help more plant growth. Anyway, next slide.
So here we go, management again. September 1 to September 15. Start planning for next year because we know, and if you guys remember what last fall was like, it was dry, right? And so actually some people were actually feeding a little bit of protein until they got those calves weaned just because the cows were lacking in nutrition. And some of our late calvers had some really low conception rates because that grass was so poor quality. So as we get to this fall, you need to think about that and then think about next year. So what are we going to do next year? What are we going to keep those numbers reduced? Does it look like we're going to get more rain in the following year? We don't know that, right? So we do know we're going to probably feed more hay and feed that's not pasture because of the drought, or we're going to have to sell more cows and we're going to have less cows the following year. Now, if we saved more heifers, that might help us there. Early weaning those calves is going to make a big difference. Even last year, a lot of people tried to get those calves off early just because the quality of the forage was so low. And then what do you do in marketing those calves? So if you early wean them, your marketing window may change. And so you want to think about that. How do I want to market those calves? Right now, calves are really good price, right? Even light ones. But that may not always be the case, and it may be that you want to have a certain weight when you market them. So that you're gonna have to rethink that a little bit, especially if you're early wean. Corn stalk leases. What we saw in 22 is I saw people coming all over into Nebraska to lease corn stalks, and even last year we saw a lot of that. Just because they needed feed, right? They didn't have any winter feed. Corn stalks will replace a lot of your winter feed, so you can at least get those cows on there, get them off your pastures, and then save that hay for the spring when they're calving and you're getting them back. So corn stalk can be a real help to you. The thing is, a lot of people have corn stalk already tied up, so you're going to have to do some research and have to look around for them. And then, acquire feed. If you're bringing in feed, and we had this happen in 22 and some of our earlier droughts, you can bring in invasive plants that you don't want. So you need to really be careful, and especially if you're going from other states. Some of them have, but even Nebraska has some of those issues with some of them. But be really careful when you're bringing it in. Hey, and what kind of weeds does it have in it? Do you really want to put those kind of weeds in your pasture? And then especially don't bring, fescue. I worked in Missouri for a while with fescue toxicity. Our cows don't handle fescue very well. And so I've had people bring fescue hay in and lose tails and hooves. And the reason they did is because of the toxicity of the fescue. And so I would not recommend buying fescue hay in Nebraska just because our cows aren't used to it. In those states, they're already used to it. And I think our cows will be more reactive to it than they would.
All right, so we've covered trigger dates and some things to think about for management strategies if this drought persists. It is definitely in the forecast, although as Ryan pointed out, maybe not looking quite as bleak as it did in 22, or for us older panelists, 12 or even 02. I think what we were wanting everyone to take away from this today is we're just encouraging you to plan now, or you will react later if the drought persists. These trigger dates are a tool you can use to help set some goals for your management plan during a drought. Again, reminder, if we are reducing stocking rates, we look at that by either reducing the time grazed or reducing number of animal units, or maybe size of animal units, as we discussed heifers versus pairs. And in all of this, we would just really encourage everyone to be flexible in what we can do to plan for drought. Next slide, please.
Really quick, I would add that the planning now versus react or dealing with it later includes overgrazing. If you overgraze during a drought, you will pay for it the following years in reduced productivity and reduced range health.
The other thing I would say too, Ryan, is, there is some tax consequences. So you need to make sure you talk to your tax accountant. There is some things, if it's declared a drought, there's some benefits there, but you need to talk to your tax accountant on that, and just know that could affect how much taxes you pay.
All right, we have, we're extension, so we have lots of resources. And here we go. FSA, NRCS drought programs. This is important that you check in with your local office to see what is available. But one thing we have noticed is you definitely are going to want to keep records. So please be aware of that. Also, when forecasting range production, range health, especially in Western Nebraska, grass cast is an option to look at. It should not be used as a sole planning tool, correct, Ryan?
That
But
is
it
correct.
can give you an idea of what things may look like depending on above average and below average precipitation. Another one where we pulled some of these maps from seen today, the National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center. They show short and long-term precipitation and temperature forecasts. I haven't checked them in the last week, but I know the outlooks through most of 2025 look like below average precipitation for at least the western 2/3 of Nebraska.
Okay.
Another neb guide we might direct you to, especially with the Sandhills area, is the skillful grazing management on semi-arid rangelands. And I know if we don't have all these links in the chat, they will be shared later on the page with this recording. Also, another link is available at drought.unl.edu. They have a guide there, a pretty intense guide on how to write a drought plan for your ranch or your operation. And then last but not least, as livestock systems educators with Beef Focus, we would be remiss if we did not direct you to beef.unl.edu. Next slide, Ryan, please. As you can see, here's our contact information. All three of us would be happy to talk to you if you have further questions about drought, one-on-one, group-wise. Here's the best way to catch us. The joke is just drive along Highway 83 and you can find all three of us. And last but not least, on our last slide, I just want to remind everyone again that coming up next Tuesday, and one thing I would point out on this meeting is we will have someone from the FSA office to discuss those programs available from the USDA. So there'd be more details there. But Tuesday, April 15th, starting at 6:30 Mountain Time, we're going to do an overview of conditions in the outlook yet again, with a little more in depth from Eric Hunt, our state meteorologist. And also we'll be discussing rangeland response to drought, annual forage options, dry allotting pairs, as well as, again, USDA programs for producers. So here's more information on that. I believe with that, if there are any questions from the group, we're all ears.
And TL, you'll want to sign up for that because you won't get the link unless you sign up. So go to that.
Yep.
That website and you can sign up or call the number.
Correct. Yes. I believe the in-person sites would appreciate an RSVP as well.
Sounds good.
Thank you, TL, Ryan, and Randy. Great presentation today. And we'll give a moment if anybody has any questions here before they leave. Please do type those into the Q&A or chat. We'll hang on for a second to see if we can answer anything else before we leave. And if you do head out soon and close your Zoom window, you'll be presented with a very short survey that just asks your opinion on how today went and helps inform our webinar series here at the Center for Ag Profitability, so we can continue hopefully coming up with topics that are relevant to people, producers across Nebraska and beyond. So far, not seeing anything yet, but I'll go ahead and put the contact info back up on the screen there. So if anything comes up after this, you can get a hold of any of Randy, TL, or Ryan to answer your questions. We will have this recording posted likely later this afternoon on our Center for Ag Profitability website at cap.unl.edu/webinars. We'll have these slides there as well, so you'll have access to all the links and everything that was presented here. And still seeing nothing. So with that, I think we can go ahead and close out. I want to thank everybody for attending today. And thank you again, Randy, Ryan, and TL, for a great presentation today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Take care.